always had fighters in our community. We have always, I mean, that I think is the basis of our survival. We have always had women doing the kinds of stuff that I've been doing. They're not in anybody's textbooks. They've not been celebrated in any great depth. But I think that our survival, to a large extent, has depended on women.
All people of color in this country, every day we're bombarded by this kind of, the racism here and this constant kind of, the verbalizing of it all too, right? In the most abusive way possible.
You have to look at things how white people look at them, and then you have to then think, well, this is how I would look at them. So I think you're constantly, when you examine things, you look at it through two sets of eyes. How you're supposed to see it or how they would like you to see it, and then how your experience forms your vision and how you see that.
To fight against racism and not to fight against sexism is to defeat the purpose, of being whole human beings, of being,
I think it's important for Black women to be involved in the struggle against sexism. I mean, after all, we're women, some of our white sisters forget that, but we are women. But I think in order to be effective in that broader struggle within the women's movement, I think there has to be a place for Black women to come together collectively in order to be more effective in that broader movement.
I see in our history that Black women before me wanted to know, when is it enough? When is the change going to come? But the one thing that they've always ended with, that if not in my lifetime, then it's my sister's lifetime or my children's lifetime or their lifetime. And that the struggles that Black women before us did helps us to be in the struggle now.
Whoa, sisters in the struggle, yeah, 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 yeah. Whoa, sisters in the struggle, yeah, yeah. We're struggling in the food lines. We're struggling in the job lines. We're struggling in the welfare line. We're in the abortion lines. Sisters in the struggle, yeah. Sisters in the struggle is what we are.
My father was a porter on the railroad, on the CNR, and my mother basically was a homemaker and supplemented, our home by doing odd work all through the years. In Winnipeg, we grew up in a predominantly French community where we didn't speak the language. So my family became my best friends. My brother and sisters became my best friends because not only were we different, and there was that kind of isolation that set in for us, but we also didn't speak the language.
The Black communities in Nova Scotia were segregated. I mean, people relate the Jim Crow laws to the United States, and somehow it's not talked about here as Jim Crow laws or segregation laws. But if you look at the geographic areas of the Black communities, that's in fact what it was. Segregation. The Black communities are all situated outside the, the hub of activity in the, core cities, and all the, where all the work is, immediate work, all the shopping centers, what have you. And they're miles sometimes from the cities. So that is one way. I mean, that still exists today. So if people are disputing the idea of segregation in Canada, one way to go to Nova Scotia and look at where the Black communities are.
Not in the dictionary.
What's that word you used this morning? What's that word you used this morning? Pardon?
I remember when I first came up to Canada, I went to my first public school, and I remember it was winter. And I was 13, and I can't remember what happened in the schoolyard, but I remember fighting with this little white girl, and then ended up being surrounded by this whole group of kids. Next thing I know, this girl's grandmother is here with this hockey stick, and I'm trying to protect my two sisters, so they're standing behind me. I'm scared out of my mind. I don't know what to do, and this woman is like screaming in my face, calling me nigger and go back from where you come from. And the funny thing is that this woman had like a serious, heavy accent, And she's telling me, like, go back, to where I come from. And I was 13. I didn't know what to say to this woman. So, I grabbed my sister and run, I went home to my mother, and then I got home, and then so she sat the three of us down and says, well, this is what you're going to have to deal with for your whole life. And then it's like, I don't want to have to deal with this for my whole life.
But that's the reality of living in a country such as Canada.
It's
right?
even funny, like my 6-year-old niece is having problems in school. Like the white kids are spitting on her, punching her in school. And I mean, I'm not going to tell her, well, you know, just don't get her. I said, punch them back, spit back in their face. You know, I'll come and hold them while you hit them.
Yes.
You know? I mean, what she has to learn, you know, she has to learn to defend herself. I mean, it's starting so young.
I came, landed in Vancouver, and in a school of like 300 kids, I was the only black kid. And I was the only black kid that just came off the boat, basically, because I had strong patois accent, and everything was a joke. You know, they asked me a question in class, and I hold up my hand and answer, and as soon as I answer, everybody starts to laugh. You know, and during recess and stuff, it was always, the games always turned into Jigaboo and Chocolate Milk and Aunt Jemima. And I used to go home at first and tell my mother said, you know what, go back to the schoolyard. She says, go back to the school and you kick their asses. My mother would come to schoolyard and stand up at the gate with her coat on and a big scarf, and she'd stand there and she said, fight.
I remember when I used to work, you know, part-time in hospitals, and I'm coming home midnight. Always when the subway opens, when the subway cars open, black women coming in. Similarly, if you're going to work 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, black women getting on the subway. Always, and you look, and these are older women, and you look and you say, God, these are our mothers and grandmothers. What the hell are they doing? Like when the whole world, when the perfect white world in this country is asleep, black women are working.
Unlike black men who can say, I can't find a job because I'm black, black women can always find a job in people's kitchens. They can always find a job cleaning people's houses, watching people's toilets. They can always find a job doing cheap labor in factories. So they can always work. What racism proscribes is the kind of job that they can find. So that in order to get the better job, they have to be better qualified. You have to be better qualified as a woman, and you have to be better qualified as a black woman for any job that you would care to apply for. So it's a double burden that you carry.
Je suis arrivée ici le 1er août 1970. Pour moi, je fais toujours référence à la crise d'octobre au Québec parce que c'était un événement important. C'était 2 mois avant la crise d'octobre. Ça m'avait impressionné parce que je venais de quitter un pays où on était sous un régime de terreur et la crise d'octobre m'avait fait revivre ce que j'avais laissé chez nous. Et au niveau du travail, j'ai d'abord fait du service domestique. Le problème, c'est que les femmes qui arrivent ici ont besoin de travailler. C'est notre premier objectif, c'est de venir travailler, améliorer les conditions matérielles d'existence pour notre famille d'abord. Alors, les femmes se retrouvent très vite en arrivant sur le marché du travail à faire n'importe quoi pour gagner de l'argent, n'importe quel travail pour gagner de l'argent.
I think black women have always worked. I mean, black women have always worked. I mean, in the West Indies, talking about immigrant black women, I mean, women have always worked. You had the extended family to care for the child or the children, and women have always gone out to work. It is not a choice of black women. You have to work to make ends meet. I mean, there's no choice. And I often wonder how black women survive in this country.
I mean, the labor market, it's gender segregated and it's also racially segregated. So therefore, you know, by having, you know, black people and particularly black women, you know, therefore you can put them at the lowest and exploit them the most.
You need the workers to keep the system going. And I think that they do it all over the world where they have certain sections of society. They have to keep them there because if they don't have these workers, what they're trying to maintain is going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. So they need to have the underpaid, need to have the people that they import, especially for these jobs, and still send out the messages they're coming to take your jobs. Come to take what jobs?
Good enough to work, good enough to stay. Good enough to work, good enough to stay. Good enough to work, good enough to stay.
Well, there was a time in Canada when, you know, in most North American countries and European countries, there was a need for domestics, you know, people to clean white people's homes and tend their children. And of course, they usually look to the poor third world nations whenever they have this kind of need. And so Jamaica was one of the countries favored for recruitment of these kinds of women. One of the requirements of the agreement that was signed between the Jamaican government and the Canadian government was that these women should be single, of course not have any husbands, and no dependent children or any other such appendages. But of course, the women were instructed at the time by people who were recruiting them that they should not declare the children or they would not get a chance to go. It was never raised before. The thousands of women who had applied for their children to become landed immigrants in Canada and had not been confronted with that fact that they had not declared the children on their original application.
Stop the deportation now! 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 Stop the deportation now!
It was a very hard time to be struggling for any kinds of rights in this country. It was a very, very difficult time because it seems like the system had just gone against black people, just gone against immigrant people.
Good enough to work, good enough to stay.
Telegrams were sent from just about every single province in this country to the Prime Minister to rescind those deportation orders that had already been issued and not to issue any more.
Racism is out in the open. The traditional, polite Canadian racism, which I first contacted in the 1950s, no longer exists. It is now out in the open, which in a way is good because we can deal with it. It's right out there now. It's evident in injustices in the courts. It's evident in the way in which the police respond to issues around race. It's evident in the way in which our school system, it's evident in government policies around what happens to the Native communities, whether it's on their land claims issues or any other issue in which they have to deal with the federal government. It's out there now.
Well, the police as the arm of the state that is usually used to intimidate, they took on a particular stance in the 70s because, well, the police was acquitted after the Buddy Evans murder was never charged, after the inquest was never charged. And then, of course, they went on to murdering another black man in the city, Albert Johnson. But then the reaction to that murder by the community actually reined in the police for a good 10 years because they did not expect that kind of overpouring of anger from the black community over that killing as it had occurred. And it caused them to step back and make a reassessment of what it is that they were forced with in terms of resistance.
Justice for Buddy Evans. Justice for Albert Johnson.
And then we had the murder of Lester Donaldson, you know, and then soon after that, there was Wade Lawson within a month. There was Wade Lawson, and then another year later, we have the Sophia Cook situation.
C'est presque toute la société qui avait réagi contre... la société blanche réagissait contre les Noirs dans certains quartiers après l'affaire d'Anthony Griffin. C'est comme si on disait, ah ben oui, les Noirs, ils réagissent, ils manifestent, alors que Anthony Griffin n'était pas un saint. Ils ne comprenaient pas que notre... choc ne venait pas du fait qu'on dit qu'Anthony Griffin était un saint. Le choc venait du fait qu'il y a un jeune qui n'était pas armé, qui était debout et qui s'est fait tirer une balle dans la tête parce que le policier dit qu'il menaçait de courir.
No justice, no peace. 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 No justice, no peace.
I think that adolescents in particular do not have any place in which to make mistakes in this country. Whereas, you know, in where we come from, that kids could hang out, they could lime, you know, they can do the kinds of things, they can make mistake. Somebody in those countries will pick them up, pull them up. Here, if a kid gets out of line, he may end up dead.
Last November, when Michael Wade Lawson was killed, I mean, there was sort of, you know, it was out in the suburbs where, you know, a lot of people live out there. They figure, you know, well, racism doesn't touch me out here. I mean, hey, life is safe and secure out here. And yet here he was, a black child out there in the suburbs, and he was shot, killed by a police officer, right? And so it's like, it's sort of all coming around, saying that, you know, really, you are not safe anywhere you go.
You know, when I heard that Sophia Cook was shot, I thought, you know, fuck, here's something else. Because so far all the shootings have been black brothers, and we were always there for that. But there was never a woman shot, you know, in this kind of situation, you know, and recently. And I just found all this anger coming up from all the other stuff. I'm saying, on top of everything else, they're fucking shooting us down now too. Come here, young left. Sign this petition into police violence, not to shoot anybody, okay? And I'm allowed to get away with it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Would you sign this petition to end police violence?
Here. Just put citizen or student or whatever. We are organizing, we are angry, and we are disturbed and everything because the cops keep shooting down black people. But we also recognize that other peoples in this society are experiencing harassment by police. And we looked across the country and we saw similar things going on, happening with Native peoples, violence by the police happening to Native peoples. We look at the J.J. Harper shooting and we see what the inquiry is all about. It's all racism, yeah? It's all racism by the state. It's all the forceful arm of the state sitting on all peoples who seem powerless.
issue, the crux for us is that the police organization is reflective of a dying type of bureaucratic structure, that it impedes justice not just for blacks but for everybody who comes up against that system. And there has to be new methods in terms of policing. There has to be ways in which in a democratic society that you can have a police force that is accountable, that can act in a just and an impartial manner, and it is that aspect that the government does not want to look at all. All the institutions have been framed in a monocultural framework. You know, they've been set up by the British, hundreds of years ago. These are the institutions that have been shaped in a way which captures the sentiments, the norms, the values of mainstream society. Despite the fact that Native people have been here eons and eons ago, they are not shaping any institution. They are left out of that by virtue of racism. And then along, if you look again, the Chinese who were here, who built the railroad, they haven't shaped any institution. Their norms, their values are not intricately tied into any one of these institutions. And we are saying that in 1989, going into the 90s and going into the 21st century, how can you continue to have these dinosaurs, keeping people out, of their input and their values and their customs and the idea. It runs counter to this whole notion of multiculturalism. I don't believe in it very much, but it runs contrary to that whole direction of government policy saying that there is diversity. Diversity, but where does the diversity play itself out?
Nous avons beaucoup de choses en commun avec la communauté québécoise. Nous avons été colonisés par les mêmes colons, par les Français. Nous avons hérité d'une partie de la culture française. Mais je crois que la société québécoise a un malaise face à la communauté haïtienne parce que ce sont des gens du tiers-monde, parce que ce sont des gens de couleur noire. Alors, on nous juge comme des immigrants non intégrables qui ne pourront jamais faire partie de cette société-là. Et s'ils pensent à la question de la couleur, c'est vrai que nous ne pourrons jamais faire partie de cette société parce que nous ne pourrons jamais devenir des Blancs. Ils ont beaucoup cette peur, la peur de disparaître, comme ils disent. Ils disent qu'ils ont peur que leur culture disparaisse. Mais moi, je pense plus qu'ils ont peur que la race blanche ne soit pas aussi évidente qu'elle l'est présentement. S'ils me disent qu'ils veulent défendre leur langue, je vais comprendre. Et ils ont tout pour défendre leur langue. Et nous allons être avec eux comme francophones qui avons étudié le français. Nous allons être avec eux pour les aider à défendre la langue française. Mais ils ne peuvent pas faire alliance avec nous, même pour défendre leur langue, parce qu'ils ne nous considèrent pas comme des intégrables. Et c'est juste la couleur qui fait la grande différence.
Sister, walk to the left. Watch out for the right. We want freedom for our people as we fight for our lives.
Well, I grew up in one of the poorest areas of the city of Kingston called Rockfort, between Warwick Hill and 2 seconds from the open ocean, where, I saw poverty and violence in a very concrete way, malnutrition among the children, and became very, very active politically at 14. I mean, really very, very active.
It was my aunt who considered herself a Fabian socialist, who tried to explain some of these ideas which I had garnered from my grandmother and from my parent about, decency, social justice, humanitarian fairness, these kinds of things. She was the one who actually conceptualized it and said, as a Fabian socialist, these are the things that we believe in. Then, of course, once I got involved with the New Democratic Party and started doing more reading and talking along these lines, it became clear that that was my commitment ideologically.
I joined the Vancouver Black Action Group in about 1970. This group that I joined was an all-black group, and it sort of grounded me in a way and confirmed my loyalty to black people and to myself as a black woman. And it was really inspiring to be around black people without any white interference about in a way that we could talk about our lives that was real. And I have found over the years that there's a constant pull to take you somewhere else on other people's struggles and to ignore our own. So I really felt empowered, and I felt really a renewed loyalty about my history and my blackness.
I remember, looking around me and seeing the position that black people occupied in this country, and to take it further, seeing the position that black women had in this society. And I remember at that time feeling angry, but not knowing what that feeling was. And when I met women from the collective, they named that feeling for me. And it also gave me an outlet where I could, use that energy to work to change things. People always say that your anger immobilizes you, but that's not true.
It's amazing how certain things could affect the way you think about society, and it's sometimes not major things. Because where I live, right, you had to walk down a track to come to the main road. You don't get anywhere in Kingston unless you pass that particular road. What I would watch for a lot was the prison lorry, right? I used to remember watching for that prison lorry that would pass in the mornings to take prisoners who were sentenced to hard labor to the quarry, right? And I remember standing there and watching that prison lorry pass in the mornings and running down to watch them pass back in the evenings and look at the prisoners in the back of the lorry. And what struck me, one day it's just like something hit you, but it's all poor black people in that lorry. The blackest of blackest in the country. You know what I mean? You didn't see one fair-skinned person sitting in that lorry, going back in the morning, coming back in the evening. It's as if people of a certain shading didn't commit crimes at all. And I remember that thing hitting me, right? And at 18, looking around and knowing that a lot of the people I went to school with, they were killed. And what were they killed for? Nothing. Because they were standing at a street corner and a police jeep come up on the run and they happened to take a shot in the back. That kind of stuff, eh? And during the Black Power era, of course, I became also influenced by going to sit and listen to people like you, Small, talk about Marxism and stuff and the Black Power thing in the States, and reading Malcolm X and, Soul and Ice and Eldridge Cleaver and all those kind of stuff. And, reading The Wretched of the Earth when I didn't understand nothing that it was talking about, and I had to read it again years later, and that kind of stuff.
Here were black people, I think for the first time that I was meeting Jamaicans and Trinidadians were there, and Dominicans and all people from the Caribbean as well as from Africa coming together, talking about their own experiences in Canada, but also seeing that it had a link with what was going on in Africa, because those were black people too. People who were trying to throw off this yoke of colonialism. And those are our brothers and those are our sisters. We felt very close to them.
I think that I have this philosophy within me that no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, you have a right in this country, in this society, to represent yourselves and others like you in terms of equality, getting that equality, ensuring that equality, and maintaining that equality. So it's a very personal thing in terms of just ensuring, not only for my kids or myself, some kind of equality in the society, but for individuals who really feel the impact of the oppression that happens to poor people in the society.
But sexism was another issue. I mean, that really was a hurdle in terms of getting into politics, because certainly whether it was at all candidates meetings or phone-in programs or whatever, people always raised the issue about whether politics was a place for a woman or whether politics was a place for a mother. You have children, why are you not at home taking care of them?
Ann Coles, who used to be very active in the community at one point, came to meetings and she started to be very abusive to the men that were there because they were grandstanding. The men were in the forefront, and, a lot of women, what we did was to cook, and do all the kinds of shitty jobs, while the podium would be reflective of just males. And Ann Coles was the one who spoke out against this, not in the best ways, mind you, but it really riveted our attention, really, and to say, this is sexism, It's fine to talk about ourselves as women, which we never did. We just talked about, black people and da-da-da-da. But we never really talked about ourselves, our lives, what sexism and racism does to us. We did not focus on that at all.
I recognize the relationship or the connection between myself as a black person having to deal with racism and myself as a woman having to deal with sexism, largely really through following the statements of black men involved in the civil rights movement. Stokely Carmichael, people like that who made comments about black women's role as being simply there to serve, really jolted me, because I knew we had an important place to play in the struggle for equality as black people. And then to realize that even after that's won, I would still have to deal with an unequal status, even within the black community as a woman, was a jolt for me.
You see in many other black organizations where women are involved, is that you see women doing the cooking, as the lady was saying, we do the cooking, we do, sort of the prep work for the demonstration. And yet when it comes time to speaking, we never get the chance to voice our opinions, so we never get heard and we never get validated as women in the movement. We get validated as women who are helping the movement, and the movement is male.
Somebody's woman. Oftentimes, whether it be within, the black movement or in the women's movement, the issues that are specifically affecting black women are left out. It's like sort of, oh, they're all women anyways, or they're black, and so therefore, that'll be good enough, right? Yeah. Where the specificity of issues relating to black women are not addressed. And so I think that's another part about what the collective is all about, addressing those specific issues that are affecting black women's lives.
Also, black women are tired of having to take, the back space in the black organizations. We have to realize that nobody is going to make space for us, that you have to get up and take your space.
When I look, even as a younger person, the way I used to organize in my own country, you know what I mean? As I said, I ended up being around a lot of men. And I learned to be a feminist from being so much with them and observing the way they deal with women in the political struggle and dealing with women even on a personal level. It was automatic that I would develop certain feelings about the way I was never going to be treated. When you have worked with 4 generations of men politically, 4 generations of men I have worked with politically, very closely, 4 generations of men. You can't other than be a feminist. It's unlikely that you would become anything else.
Feminism is a white ideology, and more I'm being convinced of that. I see where I am in my workplace that there is a thrust for women writing, to have discourse about women, that policies and programs reflect women's realities. The women, again, that thrust is towards mainstream women, white women for the most part. And there has not been an equal weight in feminist discourse in terms of be inclusive of all those other women that make up this community of women. And so it is very much white, it is very much middle class at this point, because I don't think it really even addresses poor white women's issues, on a consistent long-term basis.
Coming to feminism was something, I think, that gave me a different analysis of life, that helped me to understand that the things that were happening to me weren't just happening to me. And I can remember the first time I read The Feminine Mystique, how I was just blown away by it, because here I was all along, seeing other people happily married, raising children, juggling jobs, being chatelaines and socialites, and doing all of it without gaining weight or growing old or doing any of these things that were happening to me. And I wondered what was wrong with me. Why was I having so much difficulty trying to be this superwoman? And then to read about the fact that it happens to everybody. We had been socialized even before birth. I mean, this is generations of socialization to run this race which we could never win under any circumstances. And that women, not just here, but everywhere in their own cultures, were confronting the same things, this incredible no-win situation.
For me, feminism needs a lot more clarity in terms of its relation to black women and women of color, to the notion of poverty, and those kinds of things. There's not enough clarity for me to politically identify myself as a feminist. A womanist just means, the commonsensical approach to being a woman, and that whole pride around that whole non-acquiescing mentality to believe in who I am, to take on things that, take on anything I want to do, that whole belief. And for me, just to make a long story short, that's what being a womanist is all about, and advocating on behalf of women.
People who you interact with who have problems with the term feminism because they see it solely as a white middle class term, a white middle class label, and they see you fighting against black men. So they don't understand that women, black women, we have the commonality with black men of being black, and living in a racist society that discriminates on you on the basis of, because of the fact that you're black. But also we have to fight with black men on sexism. And as Linda was saying about organizing yourselves as women and labeling yourself feminist, you put yourself in the position of being isolated and being labeled as lesbian, and usually lesbianism is seen as something derogatory, because once you're labeled as lesbian, you therefore have no political validity.
Even when people thought that lesbian and feminist was synonymous, to be a feminist you had to be a lesbian, I figured, well, I happen to be a lesbian. So what am I going to do, deny that part so I can work within the black community?
I think that racism, for me, takes precedence over the struggle against sexism. And this is personal. I know many of my sisters won't agree with my position. When I look at my family, my sons-in-laws, they've had experience with race. My son lives in Windsor, and as you know, Windsor is quite a white town. The man in my life, my grandchildren, my grandson at 3, I had a little girl say to him, I don't play with black boys. He's only 3 years old. So that's where I'm coming from, because it transcends gender. And it has to take precedence if I look at it in the broader, not only what I experience, but also what my family, and I don't think that my family is different from many other black families in Canada.
I can't separate them. Having been both black and female, I can't separate racism and sexism and say one is more important or has had more impact on my life than the other. I believe that people in terms of discriminate against you are happy when you have both, because they can say, I'm sorry, I really like your people, but this is not a place where women can work. Or they can say, you know, I'm sorry, we can't give you housing or whatever for one reason other than the other. And usually sexism they find as an easier excuse to handle than racism. People are more uncomfortable with racism than they are with sexism. But there isn't any question that being black and female, you get both of them. You get the benefits, and you certainly get the liabilities of both of them.
The black community experiences serious oppression. But if we don't recognize the full extent of what that oppression is, which isn't just the color of our skin, it is our sexuality, it is, you know, our gender, it's all of those things, we're never going to really have a cohesive form that's going to really eradicate all the things that we are all here working to eradicate.
We're the First Nation. We're the First Nation.
I have always felt that I didn't have a voice in the women's community. And going into the Third World Women's Group was not only being able to talk to women who had similar experiences than me, but also women who had very different experiences than me. But I think the fact is that we had never individually had the collective, ever spoken from a collective voice to an issue. So for me, it was very strengthening to know that if I spoke about something, I knew that it wasn't just from my own isolated experience.
One difficult thing about working within the women's movement, which we have to do, is that dealing with racism. It's either you always have to educate them on the racism or tell them that they have to recognize the racism, which is something that they never want to do.
When we were working with the International Women's Day, we were invited to work. It wasn't as if we as black women, as a group that they saw to invite, was part of that whole movement. We were something outside of the movement. So working inside it meant we had to say, look, you can't do this. We are women that are connected to women all over the world, and in order to have a real women's movement, you have to work all together as women, organizing together. You can't keep that structure where you invite us, you control what goes, and we just fill in the gaps.
That is why I can understand when a lot of black women say, movement, what movement? I am not involved and I don't want to be involved because I always get to do the shit work. I am always the one running around. I am always the one doing the work, trying to bring women of color into the organization.
We as black feminists are committed to, you know, a feminist change. You realize that it's also important to bring together different groups and to unite, because that is a way of making the movement stronger. But also, that doesn't negate the fact that there's certain issues within the movement that has to be addressed, such as, you know, the racism within the movement and other kinds, and the elitism also. So those have to be addressed. But it's also a recognition that, you know, it's by coming together that you can move forward.
There is definitely a price to pay. When someone makes up their mind to advocate for change and for the betterment of black people and people in general, and if you take that struggle seriously, there is one thing that you must understand, that those career and academic goals and economic goals are unachievable within the context of the system.
I get tired, you know, like everybody else. I feel at times that I'm burnt out. But our community, you know, what do you do even if you're burnt out and you hear, you know, that police harassment is on the increase? How can you sit back and you do nothing when you hear so many black kids are in dead-end positions.
We take strong stand because we have nothing to lose, and we've made that choice. So now it's not a matter of going in there and kissing anybody's ass, because we realize that if we don't say it, we're a silence, and silence in this case does mean death.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, the racist cops have got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, the racist cops have got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, the racist cops have got to go. Hey, hey.
I'm the end result of freedom. I mean, every generation of black people in this country is another result of freedom.
Here I am, I'm a black feminist, I'm a black woman, and I've made a conscious political decision to fight against, these certain things that are impacting upon my life and other black women's life. Be that racism, sexism, homophobia, elitism, ageism, the whole thing. So, you're identifying, you're taking on this certain kind of identification, and you're also saying that, I'm fighting for these things because I want these things to change, right? And that's a very powerful thing to do.
It's international, it's global. We won't forget, cause we're sisters in the struggle, yeah, 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 yeah. Whoa, whoa, sisters in the struggle, yeah, yeah. We're struggling in the food line, we're struggling in the job line, we're struggling in the welfare line, we're in the abortion line. Sisters in the struggle, yeah. Sisters in the struggle is what we are. It's international, it's global. We won't forget, cause we're sisters in the struggle, yeah, yeah. It's international, it's global. Sisters in the struggle, yeah, 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 yeah. Whoa, whoa, sisters in the struggle, yeah, 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 yeah. Whoa, whoa, sisters in the struggle, yeah.